Um, Welcome, family, EAP practitioners, HR fraternity. We're so happy that this new year is giving us more of an opportunity to get together and assist with some of our learning goals as well. So today is exactly that, kicking off our learning journey as EAPA-SA. So we want to welcome everybody, our membership of the EAP community, HR fraternity. It's so amazing that we're getting such great responses for these seminars. We've had one for the year previously on addictions and with Carol Fenter, and we think that every other speaker this year is absolutely phenomenal. So we are looking forward to so many more of this. We're reaching a capacity because of the response in our Zoom calls. So we are also streaming live to Facebook. So if you know people that's trying to get in and can't, please point them back to our Facebook Live. And in doing so, we basically are now reaching a broader community. We also love how through adversity, EAP is still going strong and learning and trying to support each other. So we also want to thank our sponsors to help us to make this free. I think that makes it very accessible to our people. And so we need to also acknowledge the support of our sponsors in terms of getting these platforms to the people that need this at the moment. But you know, with COVID, things have become a bit bad. So thank you for the support and engagements to you guys for joining us, but also thank you to our sponsors for that. Just some housekeeping rules. You've seen the slides going through in terms of keeping your microphones off, on mute, and your cameras off. We have a QA option where you can post questions to the speaker, and then the speaker then will then address that at the end where we can answer all those questions. If you see a question that you like, that one of your peers have posted, please also give them a thumbs up so that then moves it to a more popular level so that we know which questions to prioritize, because sometimes it's too much. And then also in terms of other conversations, can we keep that to the chat function and not directly in QA so that the speaker doesn't see all the questions that don't relate to the actual topic. Just in terms of CPD points, we are still awaiting finalization from the Social Work Council on CPD points, and we will issue those as soon as we receive it. So just be a bit patient with our administration team, as it takes about a week or two, but we will then get that to you via email. I think down to business then, just to introduce our wonderful speaker, Paula Quincy. She is a phenomenal speaker, so I'm looking forward to this topic, which is Together We Can Stop and Eradicate Abuse. Just a little bit about Paula. She's a relationship expert and a passionate advocate for creating healthy relationships at home, in the workplace, and against GBV to co-create a more humane connection within the world and a positive impact on people's lives. She's also an international speaker and author of Embracing Conflict, and I'm just so excited for her to basically give us some of her experience. Paula is talking from personal experience. She's been on a personal journey when she lost her mother at the age of 7, and has gone through a little bit more, and I'm sure she'll tell you a little bit about that. But because of that, her passion for advocating against GBV is really coming from the heart, and that's what we need. We need to harness people's journeys to make us basically empowered ourselves, but also then to empower others. So I take my hat off to you, Paula, in terms of doing it. I'm not going to share a lot of stats and all of that in terms of discussing this, because I think we know the stats. The reality is it's coming into our lives in a big way. With regards to COVID, it's just accentuated, because now people are stuck in those homes and stuck in situations that's not ideal, and it's spilling over into the workplace, because let's face it, this is our workplace now. It's our screens, and our supports are far from us. It's literally taken away from us because of this invisible enemy. But then we have other enemies that we need to. So it's all those kind of things that's coming to this fraternity, in terms of trying to get support, or us even, just helping colleagues through supporting others, that type of thing. So Paula, this is really, really needed. Thank you so much for your time, and we're looking forward to it.
Thank you, Radhi, and thank you, Nicole, for that warm welcome, and to everybody joining us today on a topic that is very close to my heart and that I'm very passionate about. So thank you for joining us and taking time out of your day. In terms of kicking off with what Radhi was saying, is that abuse is not just a story. It is happening every day in our homes, in our businesses, in our communities, and on a global level as well. And unfortunately, due to COVID pandemic, it has just put a spotlight on how bad the GBV pandemic is globally, as well as within our own environments. So we can no longer treat it as something that happens over there or down there or to someone else, because it's happening all the time. And so I wanted to talk a bit about that today in terms of what our reality is, obviously with the changing of environments that we've gone through the last year or so, how our situations have changed. The workplace is now in our homes. We have no safe places to escape to. Some people that are in toxic environments would escape to the office to get away from situations and environments. And also sometimes when we'd had those tough days in the office, we would escape and go home to get away from it all. And now we can't do that because it's all intertwined. It's all integrated. And so we are going through, as we all know, and we've heard it before, extreme stressful situations, unusual situations, which has obviously contributed to some of the mental health issues. And I know that these stats have been shared before, but these stats are also outdated in terms of what people have been saying that they are experiencing and what I'm hearing as well in the networks and the forums that I'm in. But on top of that is the stats around abuse, and that South Africa is reported as having the highest rape statistics in the world. I'll just let that sink in for a minute in terms of in the world. And I think that's something that, you know what, we need to change, because I certainly don't hold my head high in terms of that stat where our country is concerned. And so part of today's journey is how do we start changing this narrative and this platform and this landscape that we live in terms of being proudly South African. So in terms of these abnormal stresses, it has obviously contributed to environments becoming more toxic, especially obviously with coping mechanisms that a lot of people resort to help manage. So the obvious things being the alcohol ban, the tobacco ban, but some of the other coping mechanisms that we're starting to see come out with people trying to manage and deal with what they're coping with, the isolation, the disconnect, and the loneliness, and then obviously juggling the pressures of work-life balance and integration, the impact on women in particular, and there's a lot of research to back it up, where women are taking on more roles and responsibilities and additional stresses with having to manage that home-work balance and dynamic and the homeschooling. So we know that we're going through extra additional stresses more than normal and usual. And linking to that is the challenge of remote working and working from home, where we've had to not only manage the distractions around us or behind us in terms of our household, but also the distractions on the screen in terms of digital fatigue, which is a very real thing. And I know that this was all covered in the mental health webinar that was done recently. So we know that all of these things are going on, but that also has started to show up in other ways, and particularly in terms of the new leadership skills that are needing to be brought to the forefront of managing people in these environments, and what GBV actually costs South Africa. And these stats are actually outdated because this research was done in 2014, and I haven't seen updated stats. So we need to now start looking at not only the impact that mental health is having on us in our businesses and as individuals, but also on top of that, the cost of what GBV has on us as well. And so from a leadership point of view, we're looking and seeing that leaders are now having to develop new leadership skills, which is being termed as holistic and empathetic leadership. Holistic being that I'm now managing and working with employees as a whole because I'm managing them in their own personal space, in their home environment. And I'm now seeing employees as a whole person and not just the 9 to 5 when I saw them in the office, because I'm now managing them. And I'm starting to get a glimpse of what an individual is dealing with, whether they are homeschooling and having to be teachers, as well as all the other roles that they're taking on, but also the type of environment that some of our employees have, which is, if you look at the average household, a small 3-bedroom, 2-bedroom apartment or flat, and on average between 3.5 to 4 people in a flat or an environment, and what that can cause in terms of stress around managing those relationship and family dynamics, and how that affects us on an individual level, as well as from a collective in terms of the impact on children, but also the impact on couples and relationships and family dynamics as well. And so part of the whole mental health thing is, how do we bring the human back? And this is where, first of all, from an individual point of view, but also collectively as teams, as leaders, and as businesses, realizing that we are human at the end of the day, and that mental health has actually become an everyday necessity. It is not a luxury. And I say this respectfully, it's not something that we do once off, where we have an annual wellness day and we take your blood pressure and we give you a leaflet and we say, there we go, we've taken care of your mental health today. It's an everyday necessity, because if we are not well, we are unable to function and operate effectively, both personally as well as professionally in terms of the workplace. So we are starting to realize that as human beings, we're not invincible, that we cannot keep going and burning the candle at both ends, and that unfortunately toxic environments are very real for a lot of us. So it's around talking about this and making it okay for people to speak up and speak out and say that I'm not okay and I'm not coping. And it's not just from a mental health perspective, but it is also in terms of any form of abusive environment or situation that you find yourself in. We need to start removing the stigma that is attached to gender-based violence and abusive behaviors and unhealthy behaviors, whether it's unhealthy behaviors towards self, whether it's unhealthy behaviors in the home environment from a partner relationship point of view, from a family dynamics, children perspective, and in the workplace in terms of unhealthy behaviors in the workplace. So we need to start making it okay by talking about these things every day and including it in part of our conversations, and not just when a case or a situation happens to crop up and then we talk about it in hushed tones behind closed doors. We need to make this an everyday topic that people feel comfortable talking about. And it starts with putting our own mask on first and owning up and being aware of and taking ownership of when we are not in a good space mentally and emotionally, and when we're not in a good environment that is healthy and where there is abuse. Because only when you can acknowledge it and be honest with yourself and say, yes, this is me, this is my life, this is what's happening to me, is it okay then, or makes it safer for us to speak up and speak out to others and to ask for help. And so it's paying attention to the red flags at an individual level in the home, but also in the workplace. And where this is starting to play out now in particular is when it comes to employee wellness and well-being and employee wellness initiatives that are being put in place, particularly when we talk about mental health. Mental health has become very topical lately because of COVID, but what we're not talking about is GBV as being a part of that. We're talking about mental health and how we manage our work-life day balance, how we manage digital fatigue, but we're not including GBV or abusive environments as part of it, and we need to. And we need to start including it as part of the solutions and the support services that we now start offering under employee wellness and policies and protocols and support structures that we're putting in place. And we need to start, so first of all, from a leadership point of view, and this is where it's making it more challenging operating in a digital environment as opposed to a face-to-face environment, is where and how do we start paying attention to the red flags that, or the signs that something could be going on here. For example, if you have an employee that is generally outspoken, that is engaging, that it participates, and all of a sudden over time their behavior starts shifting and starts changing, they start withdrawing, they don't participate, they're not showing up or potentially not delivering. How do we start paying attention to those kind of things at a human level, and that our employees are humans, as well as our own red flags potentially and some of the coping mechanisms? And one of the things that I'm seeing from a coping mechanism point of view, besides the usual ones, which is things like alcohol, tobacco, drugs, and I'm not just talking hardcore drugs, I'm talking about things like pain medication, sleeping tablets, antidepressants, anxiety medication, etc., but is emotional snacking as a way of managing stress or managing the situation, the environment. Because when we're at home, it's far easier for us to go to the cupboard or go to the fridge and start snacking on things which we wouldn't necessarily have been able to do in the workplace. So what are some of the things that you've stopped doing in terms of activities or routines or self-care measures that you put in place for yourself, or that some of your employees have stopped doing, or even potentially some of your friends and your family members? And is that because it's from a mental health perspective, or is it because there's something else going on there? So how do we start building in these daily checks and being aware of potential red flags that are cropping up for us? And the only way we'll do that is by starting to have those conversations from a team point of view and creating a safe place in the workplace to talk to each other, but also support structures that we're putting in place. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit more. But also it's around ditching the guilt, the stigmas that are associated with sexual abuse or abusive environments. And part of that is that we need to start talking about abuse in all forms and shapes, not just sexual abuse and not just physical abuse, because there are other forms of abuse that we don't identify with, we don't associate, or we don't talk about. And I'm talking about things like financial abuse, I'm talking about verbal abuse, I'm talking about mental emotional abuse, and discrimination around other forms of abuse. And so it's taking away the stigmas. One of the big ones being guilt, obviously, in terms of the victim feeling guilty that it is their own fault, that they brought this upon themselves, that they are deserving of this kind of behavior, and that, you know, they must have done something wrong to bring this onto themselves, and what that does for them at a self-confidence, self-competence, self-worth, self-belief, self-value perspective. And so one of the ways of doing this is encouraging them that what they're experiencing is perfectly normal, and that to get rid of the guilt is to stop torturing themselves. And what I mean by torturing themselves is that irrational thinking, that overthinking around, but is it really abuse? Maybe I did do something, maybe I didn't do something. And so when we start talking about these red flags or these symptoms of, from a victim perspective in particular, to help them understand that what they're going through is perfectly normal and it's perfectly okay. But it's this, when they get stuck in these cycles of this and overthinking and over-analysis paralysis, and carrying that cloak of guilt and that cloak of shame with them, which makes it difficult for them to speak up and speak out. So one of the ways of ditching the guilt is by giving up that irrational thinking, that overthinking, that analysis paralysis, that maybe if I did this, maybe if I did that, if I could have done this, if I could have done that, if I should have done this, should have done that, that then potentially this wouldn't have happened to me. And to remind them that they are the innocent victim here, that nobody at any point, at any level, deserves any form of abuse. And so it's getting rid of the guilt, and it's getting rid of the shame that comes with that. And the reason often why people don't speak up and speak out is that fear of rejection, that fear of I'm going to be stigmatized. That fear of I've now got a target on my back in the workplace, and it's going to limit my career choices and my career movement, or I'm going to be ostracized by my family and by my community and the people that I'm turning to that are supposed to be keeping me safe and protecting me. And so it's also helping them overcome the sense of shame. And that's often why they hold it in, they hold on to it, and they don't verbalize it and speak out about it. And that's what keeps them stuck in this victim space. So how do we encourage them? By creating a safe space, by talking about this as an everyday topic that they can then speak up and speak out. So instead of holding it in, acknowledge that this is what happened to me, this is how I'm feeling, this is how it's impacted me, and that it's perfectly normal for me to reach out for help. So by speaking out, we minimize the impact, or we minimize the experience. And when I say minimize, I'm not saying that we take it away and that it didn't happen, but we minimize the shame and the guilt and the stigma that comes with that, that's associated with that experience, and they can speak out and seek help and get the help and the support that they need. And then part of that, linked to that, what prevents people from speaking out and speaking up is that fear of failure, that they see themselves as failing or being a failure. For example, I failed at my marriage. I failed at being a good wife or a good partner or a good husband. I failed at being an employee and putting a boundary down and speaking out and saying no and pushing against, whether it was a boss or a fellow colleague or whoever the other person or persons were that were involved. And so it's removing that failure, and it's not personal. It doesn't make you a failure. It's because failure is an event. It was either the system didn't support you, the system wasn't there for you, it didn't stand by you. That doesn't make you the failure. It's that the system and other people failed you. Failure is an event. It is not a person. And so helping that person rebuild themselves by not seeing themselves as being a failure in the process. And the other thing that keeps or prevents people from speaking out or verbalizing what's going on for them is that fear. The fear of being rejected, the fear of repercussions, that it's going to cause backlash, that there is going to be consequences for this. And that they don't need to live in fear. And really it is, in terms of breaking down what are the facts right now. The facts are that this is the situation. I'm being abused. The emotions, this is how I'm feeling. I'm feeling like I am not worthy. I'm feeling dirty. I'm feeling shamed. I'm feeling embarrassed. I'm feeling all of those things. Because when we acknowledge the emotions we're feeling and what we're going through, we can actually then start processing and working through those emotions. And once we work with just the facts, because often what we do is when we're stuck in fear, we try to manage or control the outcome. And often we can't control the outcome. We can only control the situation that we're in. So what are the facts right now? I'm in an abusive situation. What are the emotions? What am I experiencing right now? How do I start working through those and processing those? And then what action can I take right now for myself to help myself move from where I am to where I want to go to? And when I move and take that action, what is my new reality? So in other words, what are the new facts that are presenting themselves to me? What are the new emotions that I'm potentially experiencing? And based on that new information and that new reality and that new situation I find myself in, what is the next step or the next action that I can take? And this is how we can help victims work through that fear of being of potentially what the outcome or the repercussions could be, or that potential fear of being judged and ridiculed and being thrown as an outcast from people or spaces that they would really like or need support from. At the same time, we need to look at a holistic approach, and this is where we all need to start working together as a collective. We need to start working and addressing it in our homes, in the way that we raise our boy children and our girl children, and the way we conduct ourselves as adults who are the primary role models and primary caregivers when it comes to raising boy children and girl children as to what is and what isn't appropriate behavior. It goes back to the very basic one-on-one human level in terms of values and culture in the home. Just as parents create the tone and the culture for us to thrive and grow in the home environment, so do leaders create the tone and the culture and the values for the environment in the workplace for employees to thrive in. So we need to start addressing it at the home level in terms of how we raise our boy children and our girl children. We need to look at addressing it in the workplace by how we address abuse in the workplace. And I'm not just talking about sexual harassment and misconduct. We now need to bring gender-based violence into those discussions as well, because the home is now the workplace too, and they're not separate anymore. And then we need to address it at a government level in terms of the systems that we have in place and the support structures and the budget that is allocated to addressing and eradicating GBV at a community level, at a country level, and collectively at a global level. We need to start working together as countries globally to eradicate GBV, which is as equally a global pandemic as what the current COVID pandemic is right now. So it takes a three-pronged approach and strategy, and we need to really start pooling our resources and working together and leveraging off each other's collective strengths and knowledge and systems and structures in place that we can start changing this narrative, because we've been talking about it for far too long. And again, I say this respectfully, we cannot wait once a year for the 16 Days of Activism campaign to start or to come about, that we start talking about this and what we should and shouldn't do. And for the other remaining days of the year, we don't talk about this. We need to start talking about it. We also need to start removing the labels, because I feel, and this is my view, that by using some of the labels that we're using, we're actually reinforcing the situation. For example, gender-based violence. It is not about gender, and it is not just violence. It is abuse in any form, shape, and size. It happens to male on female abuse. It happens male on female abuse. It happens to children in terms of child abuse. It happens in terms of human trafficking. It happens in terms of across the LGBTQI spectrum. So we need to call it what it is, and it is what it is. It is abuse in any way, form, or shape, and it should be unacceptable. It doesn't matter where you are, who you are, where you come from, or what part of the world that you're in. Abuse is abuse. We also need to start talking to both perpetrators and victims, and not just one. Because up until now, and again, I say this respectfully, but a lot of campaigns that have been run globally and locally have been aimed at victims and what victims need to do to get themselves out of their situation, how to reach out for help, how to leave toxic environments. But if we didn't have perpetrators, we wouldn't have victims. So we need to now start putting systems in place and addressing perpetrators too, in terms of changing their behavior and being part of the solution to collectively eradicate GBV or abuse. We can no longer send them off to anger management classes. And again, I say this respectfully, but they also need to go to various forms of therapy or rehabilitation. And we need to start making them aware of what the repercussions are for them as perpetrators, as well as what the rights are for victims that have been experiencing these kinds of situations, and what support structures are in place on both levels, from a perpetrator point of view and from a victim perspective, to start addressing this and changing the narrative together. With that, with perpetrators, by having these conversations as well and including them in the narrative and the campaigns, we also need to start making it safe for them to speak up and speak out and say, yes, I'm taking ownership. I have been abusive. I have done this. I am doing this, and I need help too. As I said, we also are evident, it's very evident now, particularly with us working from home, and we've seen the stats rise not only locally but globally, where GBV stats have increased due to working from home and being in confined spaces. We've seen, it was in France, I forget the name right now, but there was a hotel group last year that actually opened up their doors and created a safe environment for victims to come to get away from their toxic environments at home as a way of safe places. So we need to be aware that it's happening in the home, and we need to be aware of it from a business point of view when it comes to managing staff and employees, as well as the policies and the protocols that we are now putting in place from a work from home environment. And whether you are going fully remote or fully digital, or whether you are doing a blended approach of 2 or 3 days in the office and rotating workforce groups, how are you now building this into your workplace policies and support structures? And we need to start actively talking about what is and what is not acceptable or healthy behavior. So in the home, we need to start having these conversations as couples, as families, with our children, within our communities, as to what does healthy behavior look like, and how do we start modeling that healthy behavior? How do we start walking the talk at an individual level and then a collective level? How do we put down boundaries, and how do we start calling out unhealthy forms of behavior in our homes and within our communities? And whether that's through support structures like churches, like support groups, like therapy groups, SADC Lifeline, for example, run support groups for individuals and families. And when we start talking around obviously the medical and the clinical workforce and frontline people out there that are dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. And in the workplace, we need to start having the same conversations. We need to start saying and actively promoting what is unhealthy behavior in the workplace. And it is not now just about sexual harassment or sexual misconduct or bullying. It is more than that. It is bigger. We need to take a holistic approach. We need to build this into our onboarding processes and our onboarding systems. We need to build it into our culture in our workplaces. We need to build it into our employee wellness and well-being. And we need to build it into our policies and our protocols that you are potentially now revamping with creating a blended approach in terms of digital working from home. And what support structures are you as an organization putting in place? And I'll give you one example that we're involved with at the moment is the Occupational Health and Safety Act stipulates that employers need to provide a safe working environment for employees. Now, if your employees are working from home because you as an employer are enforcing a work from home policy due to COVID, where does that role and responsibility lie right now in terms of a safe environment? Is it you, the employer, who is forcing your employee to work from home? Or is it the employee who has a toxic home situation and home environment? Where do the roles and responsibilities lie? It's a very gray area right now, and not a lot of employers are looking at this and their policies and protocols, and how are they going to address these situations going forward if your employees have not already started experiencing abuse, or down the line, should you now start finding out that you have cases popping up within your work environment where your employees are experiencing abuse of some way, form, or shape. And then also calling people out, holding them accountable, and what are the repercussions when it comes to unhealthy situations and behavior, and how does it get dealt with from a work perspective or an employer perspective, and in a working environment. We also need to provide additional support and resources to employees. We all know that a lot of employees do not trust in-house systems. There is a fear that if I speak out and speak up, I'm going to have a target on my back. It's not going to be confidential. I am going to have a target on my back. So we need to provide all forms of options and support structures there, and advocate that it doesn't matter where you go for help or who you go to, but the main thing is that you get help, whether you are a perpetrator or whether you are a victim. But know that you are not alone in this journey, and that you have support, and it is your basic human right to get help and to get support. and that we, either as a family or community or as a business or as a government, as a nation, we stand by you to get help. Some of the things that if I was the Minister of Health and Safety or the Minister of Happiness, which some countries have, some of the steps that I would like to put in place going forward is around, yes, it takes courage to put your hand up and say, I'm not okay. I need help, and I've been abusive, or this is what I'm experiencing. We need to make it okay by having these daily conversations. And so being brave actually is around breaking repetitive actions. Violence will end. Repetitive actions from a victim perspective, from a perpetrator perspective, from speaking about this topic and calling it what it is and removing the labels. Some of the things that I would do, for example, on a global level, is I would pool all of our resources. Can you imagine what we could achieve together if we, on a global level, pooled our knowledge and our resources and our skills together to eradicate GBV, just like we are doing right now, where we are working together to eradicate the COVID pandemic? Imagine what we could achieve. I would also pool our resources at a national level and start working together more collectively than in silos. And I say this respectfully, but I'm talking about national support systems like Lifeline, like gender-based violence, emergency call line, like SADC, for example. I would also work together in terms of corporates and forums like this, where we pool our resources in terms of best practices and how we can take an industry stand and a sector stand to start eradicating this and really changing this pandemic, because we can no longer we can no longer keep talking about it. We have to really start putting actions in place if we want to change the narrative, especially for our children going forward. And a personal passion of mine, one thing that I would look to eradicate completely is I would remove all rape scenes from TV and movies, because I think it just reinforces the behavior. And that's one of my own personal bugbears that I would like to champion. We also need to teach people, especially now with working from home, where it may not be safe for them to speak from home. They may not have the privacy to speak from home, but the global signal for help in that they are in a situation and they need help, but they can't speak out about it, is the global sign that says, I need help. And this is a global signal, particularly when it comes to addressing gender-based violence. And we need to start teaching the signal from an individual point of view in our homes, in our communities, and in our businesses. And so those are some of the things that I think that if we stand together and we take a strong stand in the home, from a home point of view, from a business point of view, which will address a community level, from a nation, country level, and from a global level, that together, if we work together and we work smart, we don't need to work harder. There's so many things in place already. We just need to work smarter, and we need to leverage each other collectively, that we can together eradicate abuse, not just gender-based violence. And so if anybody would like to join me on this journey and champion the change collectively that we can make, I'd love you to get in touch. I'm obviously also happy to answer any questions that you may have, and also be involved in any suggestions. There are a lot of forums out there I know already that are looking to manage and are collectively trying to address gender-based violence in places of safety and support structures. And I think we have it in place. We just need to start working together a lot more smarter than what we have. And so I want to thank you for your time this morning, and I'm really looking forward to your collective input on how we make the change and how we be the change that we want to see in this world.
Thank you so much, Paula. That was absolutely a whirlwind of information, but I'm so passionate right now. I'm sitting here and I want to take some of that energy and passion of yours and And I also want to make a difference, and I'm sure all the participants sitting in this virtual room is feeling exactly the same thing. So I'm going to say, together we need to be brave. And I think that's your message. We need to come together as a fraternity of EAP, and we basically need to put our hands together and help to break that repetitive actions and violence so that it ends. I think within this community, within ourselves, but to join hands as a community and you know, push for that global reach that actually we need. Because you're right, it is a pandemic. And everyone is focused on, I mean, we used to say that with HIV as well. You know, you get so focused on HIV, you forget there's other chronic diseases. We're so focused on COVID that we know these things are happening, but we're not really also attacking it as we should be. You know, so thank you so much for that. I see there are questions, so I'm going to stop talking and maybe give voices to the people in the room. So I'm just going to open the questions that have been asked already. From Sherlock, we have, what are the other ways to make the message get across besides arranging workshops all the time in the workplace?
I think this is where, so from a collective, so from a media point of view, media needs to start talking about both sides of the story, not just from a victim perspective. Media needs to start also championing the cause and making an okay topic to talk about. Just like we talk every day about putting our masks on and sanitizing and keeping each other safe, we need to start having the same conversation around abuse and the different forms of abuse and educating people on that. In terms of within communities, so for example, in our churches, in our other support structures that are out there that are talking about these topics, so SADC, Lifeline, within the industry and the sector that we're in, and at schools. We are not taught in a school how to be in a relationship until we get into a relationship and we start talking about conflict management and being in a healthy relationship. We only get exposed to that when we get into an adult relationship ourselves, or when we're in the workplace and we now have to be a team player and we have to manage the team dynamics and not be confrontational or conflict. And we're taught to avoid conflict and confrontation because it's positioned as this ugly, nasty thing. And sometimes it can be toxic and volatile. But at the same time, conflict can simply be you and I have a different opinion and a different view. So I think it's a collective conversation around those different areas in those different environments, and even the way we raise our children around what does it mean to be in relationship, not just from a romantic point of view, relationship with self, boundaries, and relationships as a collective.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I think what Sherlock was basically looking at in terms of the workplace, and maybe I can just add to what you were saying, is from what I've heard now, media, meaning our marketing departments within the work environment, can play a big role in that, Sherlock. So not just your training departments, not just your EWP trying to, you know, do awareness campaigns, but getting both sides of the story. You know, it can be, it's people don't want to face, for example, the perpetrator side of it. But if you can do narratives and tell stories about that, I think it's a powerful message. And if we are working with the perpetrators, for instance, I've worked with perpetrators previously. You hear that actually it comes from abuse in their lives. You know, so it becomes that vicious cycle. And only when we break those cycles and people hear that we need to deal with them and their fears and issues and all of that, as Paula mentioned, you know, in terms of therapy, will we start healing, I think. So yeah, dealing with both sides of it is important, and the marketing within the workplace. To answer Sherlock's I don't know if any of the panelists or the other experts want to answer that a bit later, but we've got a few more questions. Leanne, love your idea about taking the rape scenes out of the film industry. That's more a statement. I agree. We are perpetuating. We are. I mean, I read something along in China. It was researched where these boys that used to gang rape and all of that, it was learned behavior from porn. You know, so we need to definitely look at something like that going forward. And anonymous, how can we eradicate corporate bullying as a form of abuse? And that's a little bit outside of the topic, but I mean, it is abuse within the workspace. I don't know if you want to respond to that, Paula?
Absolutely. I think, you know, it starts from the top. So leadership needs to walk the talk in terms of it is unacceptable behavior, or this is the unacceptable behavior. It needs to be an ongoing conversation, not just something that's raised as and when an incident happens. It needs to be communicated all the time through our various communication platforms and channels. So yes, marketing, intranet, training and development, health and wellness, onboarding programs, culture in the workplace. It needs to be part of everyday conversations. You know, when someone sees that behavior, call them out on it. Say, hey, that's not what we subscribe to in our business and our organization, and that's not the kind of behavior we want to see here.
I'm hearing that it must be permeating the whole environment, all levels, and it must be driven by leadership.
Absolutely.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Paula. I think we've dealt with anonymous. I don't know how to say this properly, but I'll try your name. Adesola has a question. What are the available therapies for perpetrators? As mentioned, of remote working, what methods can also be adopted by workplaces to provide support structures? He's got 3 questions, sorry, Paula. And if abuse is experienced at the workplace, having the knowledge that anyone who speaks up becomes more victimized, how can this employee be assisted? So I think 1 was for perpetrators, 2 was for remote working and how do we support that, and then the last one was abuse in the workplace and, you know, further victimizing people.
Yeah. So when it comes to dealing with perpetrators, generally, in my experience, it's been positioned as you have anger issues and you need to go to anger management classes, and I'm generalizing here. So anger management is one of those solutions because it is dealing with your anger or how you are expressing what is inside of you or what is going on for you, which often comes out as aggression or violence or verbal abuse or other forms of abuse. So we need to talk about those things in terms of how we express it. We need to talk about what underlies that causes it, or the source of it, which could be abuse in their past that hasn't been dealt with and it's now coming to the fore. You know, at the end of the day, we are not born abusers. We learn to become abusers through the environment we're exposed to, and that repetitive exposure, and then our coping mechanisms. So it's helping them understand all of these things holistically, what contributes and creates a perpetrator, and then what are the forms of therapy or therapeutic interventions they can go through, depending on what it is. For example, if it's abuse and it's combined with other forms of abuse, for example, substance abuse, alcoholism, that kind of thing. So there's various forms of therapies they may need to go through, and each case is it's different. So it would be case per case, but educating on that holistic situation. From a remote working point of view, this is where, from a business and a leadership point of view and support structures in terms of communicating with employees now that they're working from home, that potentially they could be experiencing this if they aren't already, to be aware of it, to create a safe space to speak up and speak out. If they can't speak online because it's not safe for them, what are the other channels they can use? Perhaps it's WhatsApp, perhaps it is an emergency call number or something, some kind of internal app or something that they could all ask, depending if you have the likes of an ICAS or whoever else, perhaps there is a safe way that you could communicate that, or even just educate them on this symbol and that when you see this, you know that there's a problem. And then in terms of, so the third question was the bullying, was that the third question?
I just want to go back to it just to make sure. Where's the last one?
It's the second one now on the list, Roddy.
Oh, okay. I had to scroll, sorry. If there is abuse in the workplace, can you please give us how to minimize the person becoming more victimized through this process, with experience in the workplace?
Absolutely. And I think this is where there needs to be a collective support structure put in place in terms of obviously management and supporting victims speaking up and speaking out, and the support structures in place, and that they fully endorse support. And it's okay from a culture point of view for people to speak up, because we value our employees and we value our employees' well-being, and abuse is part of that. So under the mental health banner, depending on what support structures you have in place, you may want to appoint people that specifically deal with or handle these situations, that people know I can go to that person or these people, or the likes of your employee wellness structures or ICARES in terms of external structures, or promote the external or the national support structures like SADC and Lifeline, that the bottom line is, if you need help, get help, and we are 100% behind you.
Yeah. What I am getting that you're constantly saying from a workplace perspective is that we must ensure that our workplaces have good policies around this. It must be well known by our people so they know where to get the help. And then when they access it, whether it's an internal EAP or an external EAP, they need to be able to access it easily and get the necessary help that's required. So thank you so much for that. On to the next question. Prof. Terblanche basically said that, thank you firstly, it's an excellent presentation. The focus is very strongly on the victim, which is understandable, but what is done to assist the culprit or the perpetrator, Prof? They need to be empowered in order to convince them of alternative ways, other than violence. And how should they address those challenges and issues and differences? So what are some of the stuff, Paula, that you've come across that is looking at perpetrators? Because I think that is what's lacking from our support systems within the workplace. I think lots of people are uncomfortable with dealing with it. I know when I was in the field, I was scared of these perpetrators that would come and looking for their people. I worked in a shelter, so we don't want to work with that. So now we have to, because it's a reality. So how do we actually overcome that?
Yeah. And I think this is where, the collective working together in terms of, that's a potential gap, and holistically, is that we don't create safe places for perpetrators to speak up and speak out like we do. So for example, the equivalent of safe shelters for victims, how do we create the equivalent for perpetrators? How do we find people that have potentially been perpetrators in the past, that have turn their lives around and become role models and examples, and show that it is possible to change your ways and change your behavior. Also, changing the stereotyping that we have, particularly around what a typical male behavior looks like, or typical female behavior, or not forgetting the whole LGBTQI spectrum. It's really making it okay to talk about these things, and a comfortable conversation. I think that's why it's uncomfortable, because we don't talk about it. It's hush hush. So just like we're talking about the pandemic every day, we need to be talking about abuse, and to educate perpetrators firstly on what that behavior looks like, what therapy or interventions are in place, where do they go and get it, and what the repercussions are in terms of from a legal perspective. So just use, obviously, the main one that's always used is rape, and that it is a criminal offense. But what are the other repercussions for the other types of abuse from a law point of view, and the legalities and those kind of things?
Well, thank you, Paula. Just in terms of a few more comments first. Oh no, I think it's Linda. Well presented, working together, we can fight GBV. More talks, more outreaches, and this needs to be done on a daily basis. So she's agreed with you on that. Zukiswa, can you give more guidelines on how one can intervene in addressing perpetrators? And I think we've just said that now. From Facebook, Janine's posted something that Andrew has put up. He says, how do we address GBV at home since it's not associated to work? And I think you've touched a little bit on that. I don't know if you just want to highlight one or two still.
Sure. So I think, and this is where I'm using media as a whole, so TV, radio, print, etc., in terms of changing those narratives and those stereotyping. I think also from a parent point of view, in terms of mother and father, to take a vested interest in terms of how are you raising your boy children and your girl children in terms of potential unconscious biases that you may not be aware of. Making it okay for men to speak up and speak out and get help and help, and I'm just talking from a mental health point of view, not from a perpetrator point of view, because there's that stereotyping that men need to be tough and strong and brave and all of those kind of things. And at the end of the day, they're human as well. Look for places where you can educate yourself and you can have these discussions. So, for example, I'm involved in running men's programs, and recently, in the sort of middle of last year, we also started dads and daughters workshops around helping dads understand the difference between the relationship with a daughter and a son and how they are potentially influencing their daughter's perception on relationships and healthy behavior when they get into adulthood.
That's awesome. I wouldn't have thought about that, but you're right. I mean, we need to start that early. Thank you. Anonymous, thanks for the clear, informative presentation. Poverty, unfortunately, encourages victims to accept some of the kind of payment to not reporting abuse, exploitation. This is a major challenge with students where parents even negotiate on children's behalf with the perpetrator. So that's also a reality that some of us are facing with in the workplace as well. So that's from Anonymous. It's a statement. A question, Sibongile. How do we assist an abuser who is more traditional and so much believes that there's nothing wrong with him disciplining his wife since they're married? He also does not acknowledge that he's an abuser. And this is from Polafwani. Thank you, Sibongile. I think culture plays a big role.
It does, and this is obviously, it is going to be more challenging because those cultures and those traditions are so ingrained in us. But we've got to start somewhere. And if we don't start, we're never going to change that narrative. And it may not change now. It may change for the next generation. We don't know what we don't know, but we've got to start somewhere. And I think if you can find people in those communities that are influential, that are role models, that can lead by example, and that can lead those kind of discussions and conversations, it's a step in the right direction.
Yeah, I think everything starts with discussions and education. And I think, with us being from a fraternity that encourages non-judgmental attitude, to go into those conversations and hear people. And I think when we go back to the perpetrator discussions, it's having those kind of discussions where we are trying to understand where this is coming from so we can find solutions together. Thank you. Wow, time has gone. It's 11:02. I don't see any more questions, but thank you so much. That was really amazing. Thank you, team, also the virtual team that encouraged the conversation and pushed us to wherever we needed to go in terms of sharing. I think questions help us think of things differently, Paula. or at least helps us to understand where everyone is at and what their realities are in their little parts of the industry. So thank you very much.